Here's something many people don't realize. You don't need an Investec private bank account to save with Investec. Their personal cash investments are available from 100,000 Rand and designed for capital preservation. In markets like these, having a low-risk cash component alongside equities is simply sensible, particularly if you're over 55.
Global tensions are rising again. Space exploration is quietly pushing new boundaries. And back home, there's a growing conversation about what happens when people stop waiting for the state to fix things. Good morning. This is BizNews Daybreak. I'm Asimi Nyite. Coming up, the latest from global markets and geopolitics. Davi Rutt on how South Africans are increasingly state-proofing their lives. Rory Steyn with a story about leadership from the Mandela era. And Nick Hudson on who really drives policy behind the scenes. So, quite a mix this morning. Let's start with what's been moving overnight. Tensions between the United States and Iran have escalated, particularly around the Strait of Hormuz, a key artery for global energy. At the same time, there's a very different kind of milestone, with the Artemis II mission pushing further into space than we've seen in decades. Here are the news updates from our partners at Bloomberg.
First, the latest on war in the Mideast. President Trump ramped up his threats ahead of a deadline he's imposed for Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. It is now 8 p.m. Wall Street time on Tuesday. Today, President Trump said freedom of navigation through the strait must be a part of any agreement with Iran. And Trump said it was highly unlikely he'd move the deadline again.
We have a plan, because of the power of our military, where every bridge in Iran will be decimated by 12 o'clock tomorrow night, where every power plant in Iran will be out of business, burning, exploding, and never to be used again. I mean, complete demolition by 12 o'clock. And it'll happen over a period of 4 hours if we wanted to.
Now, the UN said Trump risked violating international law if he were to make good on those threats. The U.S. military is reportedly making preparations for potential strikes on energy targets in Iran. The Wall Street Journal reports military planners are pulling out existing list of potential targets as options if the president decides to attack Iranian energy infrastructure. Oil climbed today after President Trump signaled escalation. Here is Ernest Moniz, former U.S. Energy Secretary.
A lot of the supply chains are only now beginning to feel the increase in prices. And so unless there's a very, very rapid lifting of the clouds from the Middle East, I think we have to expect ongoing, probably increased inflation as the effects come in various timescales. We are seeing various commodities going up now.
That is Ernest Moniz, former U.S. Energy Secretary. President Trump also threatened to jail journalists who published details of the U.S. military operation to rescue 2 airmen after their aircraft was shot down over Iran. Trump said the report caused Iran to issue a notification.
Because a leaker leaked that we have one, we've rescued one, but there's another one out there that we're trying to get. So actually, the country, Iran, put out a major notice, you all saw it, offering a very big award for anybody that captures the pilot.
Trump went on to accuse the journalist of jeopardizing the mission. The crew of the Artemis II space mission has broken the distance record for space travel. The capsule reached a maximum distance from Earth of 252,756 miles. Now, that feat was achieved minutes after the crew crossed over the dark side of the moon, and communication with mission control was lost for 40 minutes. Here is astronaut Christina Cook speaking to Mission Control after reestablishing communication.
Houston, we have you the same, and it is so great to hear from Earth again. To Asia, Africa, and Oceania, we are looking back at you. We hear you can look up and see the moon right now. We see you too.
Now, the crew of Artemis II has gone beyond the distance traveled by the crew of Apollo 13. in April 1970. Anthropic says its revenue run rate has now topped $30 billion. The company said demand for its Claude services accelerated this year. Anthropic also confirmed plans to work with both Broadcom and Google. Now, Broadcom is developing AI chips using Google's tensor processing units, otherwise known as TPUs. These three companies are now expanding a strategic collaboration to give Anthropic access to about 3.5 gigawatts worth of computing power. This collaboration will begin in 2027.
Back home, there's a noticeable shift in how people are thinking about the state. Economist Davi Rutt describes it as state-proofing, where businesses and individuals are increasingly finding ways to secure services and opportunities outside of government systems. It's not necessarily ideological, more practical. Here's Davi Rutt.
Leave it to the private sector to do stuff. And in a weird way, that is what's happening in South Africa, because the same ANC that wants to centralize everything, control everything, and because of their mismanagement and their corruption and their incompetence, they're destroying the stuff. And guess what? The private sector is picking up the pieces. And that is part of the bright future of South Africa.
Pitt yesterday gave us a compelling argument for state-proofing, Pitt Leroux. It was it was a strong argument for state-proofing. I don't know if you absorb much of that or if you actually agree with that's what we should be doing, state-proofing ourselves.
No, I didn't listen to Pitt. I was a little bit late. I didn't listen to that one. So help me out and I'll see if I can.
Well, should we take responsibility for ourselves, for our education, for our security, for our local areas? I think one of the people today said we should have a whole lot of little Oranias, which sounded a little bit hectic, but
we have that actually already. If you go back to Gauteng, that's what we have, all these security estates. Where I live, for example, in Pretoria, I've got my own electricity, we've got our own boil water, we've got our own security. And so why do I need a state? I don't need. Waar sal jy? Ek het jou nie nodig nie. Ek het jou nie nodig nie, by the way. I've got all of that. So in a way, that is exactly what we are doing. But there's something else that I think is more important. It's that if you look at the nature of economic activity today, it's not part of the... That's what I spoke about when I said about the farmers. The farmers, they didn't talk about farms. They didn't talk about tractors and things. They spoke about technology. They spoke about artificial intelligence, about genetic engineering, precision farming. That's the stuff that they were talking about. And that's all those things are service orientated. The stuff that's happening in the cloud. And that's one way of creating a state-proof organization. You do not need to belong to South Africa or to belong to Iranian or for anything. You can join the Flat Earth Society if you want to, and you can even use their currency in the cloud. That's one way of state-proofing yourself.
So are the Cape Exit people smoking their socks?
They are. That's not a very clever idea for a number of reasons. It's always better to be part of a bigger thing. In fact, I would like to see South Africa being integrated much more with the rest of Africa. There are so many wonderful opportunities in Africa, and we can all work together. But I certainly do believe that the power should move down closer to the people. And in a weird way, that is actually what Karl Marx also said, by the way. The word Soviet in the Soviet Union is local authority. That's what it means. And the Soviet Union means power to the people, as close as possible to the people. And in a weird way, I agree with Karl Marx on that one.
From systems to leadership, Rory Steyn, who led Nelson Mandela's security detail, shares a story that speaks to how leadership used to be understood, particularly when it comes to respect for the public. It's a small moment, but it says quite a lot when you compare it to what South Africans are used to seeing today. Here's more from Rory Steyn.
You know, Madiba didn't live in the official residence in Pretoria when he was our president, like every president before and those since. He lived at home in Houghton, in his own personal house, because he had his 4 grandsons living with him. Mandela was at Wits, and Daba was at high school at Sacred Heart College, and Andile and Mbuso were running around in nappies when I served Madiba. And he wanted to live with him. I mean, who would deny that? He'd completely missed his 2 daughters growing up while he was locked away on Robben Island and other prisons. So our job was to drive him up the M1 from Houghton to the Union Buildings, Alec. And we had our motorcade. I won't discuss the tactics, but one of the things that happens is that we have a vehicle out front who calls any potential risks back to the motorcade coming. And the president's motorcade was behind our lead security vehicle that was, the motorcade is commanded by my second in command. I don't command the motorcade because I'm in another vehicle and there's lots of calls and stuff going on. So there's an oak in the right-hand lane. And by the way, Cape Townians, do you guys know why they have those white lines on highways? You are the worst drivers in the country. Vuga nina man. Yes, like Cape Townians don't understand why there's a right lane and a left lane, or a middle lane and a right lane. They're hopeless. Anyway, so there's this oak sitting there like a Cape Townian on the M1 going north at about 90 k's an hour in the right lane. And the guys flash lights at him to say, you need to move over. And he's just not paying attention. I mean, it happens to all of us. So my 2IC sitting in the left front seat just blips the siren. He just goes, "Goop." That's all. So the guy looks up, sure, and he moves over, problem solved. We get to the Union Buildings. Where we got out of the car, that old man calls me, Rory, man, you must respect motorists. You cannot be pushing people off the road. I said, Tata, but he just, no. He has a right to be there. That's the difference. That's how far we've fallen. So the point is, as I said, the reason that those guys get away with that behavior is because their commanders are too scared and too compromised to merely implement what the law says, what the procedures say. You can only use blue lights and sirens in an emergency, and being late is not an emergency.
Just read that opening sentence again. Just remind us that opening sentence.
Never, never, and never again shall it be that this beautiful land will again experience the oppression of one by another and suffer the indignity of being the skunk of the world.
Do you think we've got there?
I do think we've come a massively far way, Alec. But I think that our leaders have so badly let us down.
And finally, to the mechanics of power. Nick Hudson, co-founder of Panda, argues that what's often called the deep state, the permanent bureaucracy, plays a far bigger role in shaping policy than elected politicians. His view is that this applies across the political spectrum, from the ANC to the DA, which raises a different question. How much actually changes when governments change? Take a listen.
The deep state is real. The international finance community puts incredible pressure on people. And, it's what's very clear is what Trump promised people during his campaign. He's now done a 180 on, and that's under pressure from the deep state and from the transnational financiers.
What's the deep state?
The deep state is the permanent bureaucracy. Politicians come and go, and they're talking heads. For the most part, they're actors. They're not people who actually have the technique and ability to change things in government. That's the role of the permanent bureaucracy. And I don't know who invented the term deep state, but Trump certainly popularized it because he said he was going to go after it. And, that's not without precedent. JFK was famously tried to take aim at the CIA, and it's a plausible reason for his assassination. But the deep state has now become this kind of festering, when you are half of the economy or more, you're in government, you're not subjected to market forces. You can stay in that position forever and a day. You can underperform in any way the citizenry can imagine, and you will still be in power. And that accretes enormous power over time. Dark funds, all sorts of things that are possible when you are in a permanent role that does not have any market discipline.
So the way that the South African government is behaving, to many is irrational, crazy, but perhaps in this environment that you've sketched, it could be rational?
You see, when it comes to anything that's important to the country, you look at the ANC and DA policies, there's no daylight because their funding gets cut off the moment they do not comply with the various craziness. COVID was an example. The climate crisis and renewable energy is another example. They're not going to, you'll never see any daylight between them because that is what's required for them to continue being in power effectively. So on any important matter, nobody makes any domestic decisions. There's no domestic decision making. So you differ in the detail. And we all that's what the media will show you is that detail. And we'll be upset about potholes and we'll be upset about taxi violence. And that's where domestic policy is sort of permitted and where the sort of what Noam Chomsky referred to as the range of permitted dissent. So on big policies, whether we have a central bank and how it works and on how much debt the country takes on and so on, the ANC and the DA are completely irrelevant. They have nothing to do with that decision process.
And that's BizNews Daybreak for this morning. I'm Asimenite. Thanks for listening. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Cheers.
When it comes to savings, we spend a lot of time discussing returns and interest rates, but not enough time asking why we're saving in the first place. That's the thinking behind Investec's #What'sYourWhy campaign that's been running. If your goal is stability or peace of mind, their personal cash investment is accessible from 100,000 Rand and you don't need to bank with them. Whatever your reason for saving, Investec understands that.